Parshas Chaya Sarah on page 106. V'ayu Chaya Sarah mea shana u'eshrim shana v'sheva shanim. So these were the lives. This was the life of Sarah. She was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. Shnei Chaya Sarah. These are the years of the life of Sarah. So of course we see how odd they write how old she is. She's 127 years old. Like, who do you know that they say, oh yeah, she's 84. She's 50 years and 30 years and 4 years. Well, that's a math problem, Solve this problem and you can apply it, for a free ticket. Right? So it's sort of funny why they start out like that. Rashi says, he begins it by saying, Lekach nichtav shana bechol klav l'klal. It says, it tells you the years in each group, right? In the hundreds, the tens, and the ones. So she's 100 years, right? Right, it says she's 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years.
157. Oh.
Right. So Omer Lecha, to tell you, Shekol Echad Nidrash Yatzmo. It's coming to tell you that each one of these three things, 100 and 20 and 7, are coming to teach you something. Right? Instead of they tell you she was 127 years old, so the fact that she was 127 tells you something. No, here that she was 100, that she was 20, and that she was 7 tells you something. What is that? Bas Kuf Kabas Chaf Lechet. She was 100 years old, but as if she was 20 when it came to sins. Ma Bas Chaf, just like a 20-year-old, Lo Chata, hasn't sinned. Shahari Eino Ba'onshim, because she hasn't gotten to the age of being punished by the Torah. So we have to explain that, because most of us understand that you have a Bas Mitzvah at 12, then you're an adult, you get punished for what you do. But there's an idea that until a person turns 21, that they're not held accountable for certain sins that they do, things that they do wrong, that the punishment is death. There is a feeling they're not mature enough yet to really be held accountable till they're 21. So it says she was 100 years old, but she sinned as if she was 20. That is to say, no sins. Right? She was clean, because a 20-year-old is a year below the age that you'd be held accountable. And then it says, and then it says, Bas Chaf Kabas Zayin Liyofi, and she was 20 years old, but she had the beauty of a 7-year-old. So this one I find a bit difficult. There's two problems I have here. One is, I don't know anybody who thinks a 7-year-old female is more beautiful than a 20-year-old. I think a 20-year-old is probably more beautiful than a 7-year-old. Maybe a 7-year-old is innocent, but it comes to beauty when a woman is, here she is at the beginning of full maturity at 20. So why would you say that she's as beautiful? She was 20 years old, but she was as beautiful as if she was just 7. What does that mean? I think if she was 7 and she was beautiful as she was 20, that would tell you something. So that's one. The second thing is, you imagine this here. This is telling you Sarah dies. This is like a eulogy. The Torah is telling us that right in the next few lines, you're going to tell us she's dead. Now, can you imagine if I got up at a eulogy, talk about like Rebbitzin, right, some real religious woman, and I say she was full of mitzvahs, and she did such nice deeds for people, and she cared about people, and she taught great classes, and boy, was she a knockout. Like, I'd never get asked to do a funeral again. That'll be it. I mean, what kind of a crazy thing? The rabbi talks like that, and that's what his Torah says. She was such a righteous woman. She never sinned, but she was really pretty. You should see how pretty she was. She was so pretty. She was like a 7-year-old. So let's understand a bit of what it's telling us here. And that idea is that when we talk about her beauty, there is an idea of I think that a 20-year-old is certainly at the prime of her beauty, while a 7-year-old has a innocence of beauty. But the difference between them is a 7-year-old has no idea what it means that she's beautiful. She doesn't. There's no concept of gender differences. There's no concept of intimacy, of sexuality. Right? They're a child. Right? They don't understand it. It doesn't play a role in their life. There's no drive. There's no interest at a 7-year-old, and therefore they're innocents. Now there's an important concept in the Torah. The Torah tells us this concept that if a person who thinks they're big is really small, and a person who thinks they're small is really big. That is to say, a person in this world has to realize that even if you're great at what you do, you have to be humble, right? You have to have humility. And if you have this humility, then the truth is you don't think you're anyone extraordinary. you can know how good you are, but you don't think that you're better than other people, then what that means is you probably are. You probably are extraordinary, a special person. If you think you are, if you're arrogant and you have a feeling that you're the greatest person, then chances are you're really very small. You just have a low self-esteem. Right? That's what this concept. And this applies here as well. Here it says that Sarah was an extraordinary woman. Right? When she had the beauty of a 20-year-old, she saw herself as like a 7-year-old. That is, with no interest in this area, because a 7-year-old has this sort of innocent beauty, but she doesn't even realize she's beautiful. Right? A 7-year-old doesn't realize that she has beauty. So too Sarah didn't even realize, didn't acknowledge that she had beauty. She was normal. That's how she saw herself. Same thing when she was 100. It was like she had the sins of a 20-year-old. That is to say, she was a righteous woman, but she did not consider herself an extraordinarily righteous person. She saw herself as a regular person. This is who Sarah realized that she was. Now, to give you an example, for instance, there are many stories about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in this way. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was probably the greatest rabbi of his time, certainly one of the greatest, and he lived until the 1980s in New York, and he was like the authority on Jewish law in the world, but certainly in North America. And he was also a very humble man. And so, like, there are many stories about him, but well, you know, two of them I can relate to. One of them says that he lived in the Lower East Side, in the tenements, and he would walk, go for a walk. And one time he's going for a walk, and some guy's on the street, and he yells out to his friend, "Hey, Moshe!" Right? Now that was his name. And Moshe turns around and asks him, "What would you like?" Like nobody in their right mind would call this rabbi, "Hey, Moshe." Right? Nobody spoke to him like that. But he didn't think twice about it, that somebody would speak to him like that. He didn't have any heirs. There was also a story of him that when he was at a wedding one time, he was in the lobby of the wedding waiting for the car to pick him up. And back in those days, you didn't have cell phones. So if you wanted to reach somebody in a public place, you called the cell phone. You called the pay phone. And then somebody answered the pay phone, and they have to go find the guy. Right? So like if you were living in a dormitory at a yeshiva, you'd call the payphone, and then somebody would go. Even in universities was like this. They'd go to the room where they were, tell them you got a phone call, they'd come. So the phone rings at this wedding on the payphone in the lobby, and a guy answers the phone and they say, "Moshe, the phone's for you." And Rabbi Feinstein starts walking to the phone, as if this young man is going to call the great rabbi of our time by his first name, right, in such a way, and that somebody's going to call him on a payphone. Right? Neither of these things are going to happen. But because of who he was, he didn't see himself as being, people wouldn't talk to me this way, or people would treat me like I'm normal. He saw himself, yes, as an extraordinary rabbi, but as a regular person. That's how Sarah saw herself. And that's why this statement is necessary, where it's not that God is telling us Sarah was a knockout. Oh man, she was so pretty you couldn't believe it. Right? That's not what they're telling you. They're telling you that she was beautiful, but she didn't see that as making her special. It was a fact. But I'm a regular person. And that's really what the message is telling you here by saying it in such a way. So then it says, but Thomas Sarah, and Sarah dies, Kiryas Arba, in this area called Kiryas Arba, He Hebron. This is a part of Hebron, the city of Hebron, Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Israel. Okay, so that tells you what happens. Now, the commentaries all ask, why does it tell us here that Sarah died and then Vayavo Avraham? Avraham comes. So Avraham wasn't there when she died, right? Because he comes after she dies. So they ask, where was he? Where was Avraham? So there's two explanations, the Gemara says. One says he was coming from the burial of his father Terah. Right? That's where he's coming from. The other explanation says that he was coming from the offering of his son Isaac as a sacrifice. That's the more common one that you hear. And it says that what happened is that the Satan, right, sort of like the evil inclination, came to Sarah and said to Sarah, "Look, your husband's killed your son. Abraham killed your son." And the shock of it killed her. That's what the Midrash says. Now, we have to understand this in light of Jewish philosophy, because Jewish philosophy would tell us that this Midrash can't be true. even though the MArrrage is a real MArrrage. So there's got to be a way of understanding it. Because Sarah died when God felt it was time for her to die. She didn't die because she got so scared that her son was killed that she died out of shock. That didn't happen. She died because it was time for her to die. That's why. So what does it mean that the story is that there's the sort of the devil, so to speak, the Yetzer Hara came to her and tricked her and told her, look, your husband, and shows her like a picture of Yitzchak being on the altar with Avram with the knife. Your husband killed him. Right? Why does the MArrrage say it? Because the idea was as follows: Sarah died when she was supposed to die. No matter what is going to happen, she died when she was supposed to die. But it made it happen that what the Satan did, he didn't make her die early. He went and he said to her that this is what happened to you. Yeah, your husband killed your son, and then she died because she was supposed to die then, not because of what he said. But now here you have that her husband didn't do it. He didn't kill her son. Now let's look at this by Avram. Avram comes, and he's coming from the tying up of his son. This was an enormous test. Here God tells him, you can't have children, I'm going to give you a child through Sarah. His name's going to be Isaac, and he's going to carry on everything that you say and you do. Everything is going to come from, right, straight on, and it's going to come from you. It's going to come from Isaac. And then God goes and tells him, kill Isaac. That means that everything Abraham stood for is done. There's going to have no one to carry on his beliefs. It's finished, right? And yet he goes to do it. So he rises to the occasion. He sees this as a test from God, and he accomplishes the test. And God tells him, don't kill your son. So he doesn't kill his son, and then God sees you're prepared to do whatever I want, whatever I say, even if it sounds absurd. You're prepared to do it, and your son will still carry on, right? So that's an enormous test. So you imagine Abraham does this test, and he walks away, and now, right, his wife dies because he did the test. It's like, God, you want to test me? And my reward is my wife dies. And why does she die? Because she heard that I killed him. That's why she died, right? Which wasn't true, but she heard that. So God, I go and do exactly what you want me to do, right? And then you take my wife away from me, right? So what is that? What that is that, according to some of the commentators, the death of Sarah was a greater test to Abraham than the binding of Isaac. Because with the binding of Isaac, he knew I have to rise to the occasion. It's like the Super Bowl, right? A guy knows, I'm either going to win this or I'm going to lose this. I've got to put everything into winning the Super Bowl. This is it. I have to win this. I'm going to do everything I can. Avraham knew that the offering of his son as a sacrifice was the test. He knew it. Right? Either God was going to have him kill him or he wasn't. But the fact that he was going to do this, Avraham knew this is the big test from God. Right? He knew that. So he rose to the occasion and he could do it. When the story of Sarah comes around, he doesn't know this is a test. He doesn't know what's going on. He hears that because of what he did, his wife dies, and all he did was God told him to do, and instead of God rewarding him, he punishes him. So now Avraham, he doesn't know that this is a test. How does he act now? And the fact that Avraham acted correctly shows God much more about him than in the last test. This was a much more difficult test because he didn't know it was a test. And yet it showed the real Abraham, the real man, came out. Because in the other case, he could have been wavering, but I'm going to rise to the occasion for this one time. But in this time, he didn't even know. He's saying, like, it's enough already. I got to do what you want to do, and then you take away my wife? He didn't say that. Right? He went and he still followed through and did what he was supposed to do. And so you see the level that he was at, and that's why the many commentators say that this was the hardest test of all, the fact that his wife was taken away here. And so it says now that it says Vayavo Avram, so he came. And what did he do? Lispod Lasari, to say a hesped, to say a eulogy about Sarah, Libikosa, and to cry for her. You notice in that word Bakosa, the third line, second last word, the chaf is small. There's one letter that's sort of smaller than the rest of the letters in the middle of the word, right? So the commentaries speak about that. Some of them say it's because Sarah was an older woman, right? And because she was an older woman already, that the fact that Avraham cried a lot was surprising, because it was sort of expected. she's or right at the edge of life. That's like somebody has a parent who's in a nursing home for years and they're not well for years, and they die, right? It's not a shock, right? So maybe the people don't cry as much, but here this is made like this to show you that he did. That, in other words, it was an enormous thing. That even though she was of the age and Hashem took her because it was her time, nevertheless he still had those emotions and he cried. And the Torah shows you that by making that letter small, which causes you to look at the word. It makes you wonder about this word. It says, Vayakam Avram me'al pnei meso. So Avram got up from sitting with his deceased wife. Vayadaber b'nei ches lemor. Now he goes, Avraham in this next section wants to buy a burial plot for his wife. Right? The Hebrews have never had this before, had someone die. So now Sarah's the first one. Now they have to, what do we do with her? We have to have a place, an appropriate place for her. So he has a prophecy that he should buy this cave called the Cave of Machpelah, which means the cave of doubles. Doubles meaning Avraham and Sarah, right? Yitzchak and Rivka, the couples. Adam and Eve are buried there, and this today is in Hebron. It's there. It's used both for the Jews and the Arabs have a mosque there, and this is the place where they're buried, the Cave of the Machpelah. And so he's going to go buy this now. Right? Now this is also a strange test, because God already told him this land is your land. God gave Abraham the land. It's his. And now he has to go and buy a piece of it from some person who's basically stolen it. Right? There's people, the Bnei Ches, are a group of people, like a tribe of people, who live in this area, and they've set up like squatters' rights. We own this land. And now Avram wants to come bury his wife there. And it's his land anyways. And they say to him, and you have this whole long talk where he's negotiating with this guy Ephron, who's the head of the family, to buy the field. And Ephron says, it's a big privilege for us to have you bury your wife in our field, because you're such a respected man. And by this time, Abraham was well known as being, somebody that God had favor on and who was a special person. So we're honored that you want to do this. And so you know what? Just give me a couple of 100 shekels of silver and forget about it. It's no big deal. But that was an exorbitant price. In other words, he's playing a used car salesman on him. He's tricking. He said, "Oh, he's buttering him up. You're such a famous person, and we're so honored to have you here." And he actually says, "I'll give you the field for nothing, because just so you're here." And Avram says, "No, I want to pay for it." And he says, "All right, what's a couple of 100 shekels between friends, right? That's like, you want to buy a burial plot, costs $3,000. So the guy says, well, I'll give it to you. You're such a special person. People will want to use our cemetery if you have a family member here because you're so special." And no, I don't want you to pay anything special for me. I want to pay like everyone else. All right. What's $10,000 between friends? Right? Okay, give me $10,000. But it only costs $3,000. Doesn't matter. Friends. In other words, that's what he was doing. He was stabbing him in the back. Right? And that's what this story tells us. We have this whole long discussion. It says that if you read in the English, right, the children of Heth answered Avram, saying, "Hear us, my Lord. You are a prince of God, right? The choices of our burial places bury your dead. Any of us will not withhold his burial place from you, from burying your dead, right? You're such a great person. Of course we're going to let you do it." And Avram rose up and he bowed down to them, right? And he spoke to them, saying, "It's truly your will to bury my dead from before me. Heed me and intercede me with Ephron." He said, "If you really want to let me bury my deceased wife here, then go and get Ephron, who owns the cave that I want. Let him grant me the cave of Machpelah, which is his, on the edge of the field. Let him grant it to me for its full price. I'll pay for it in your midst as an estate for a burial site." So then he said, "Okay." Now Ephron's sitting in the midst of the children, and Ephron the Hittite responded to Abraham in the hearing of the children, for all who came to the gate. So now Ephron is speaking in front of a crowd, right, to Abraham, but there's a lot of people there. So he says, "No, listen, I'll give you the field and the cave, I'll give it to you as well." And everybody's there, right, in the view of all the people. "Bury your dead." So Abraham bows down before the members, and he spoke to Ephron, and he says, "Rather, if only you would heed me, I'll give you the price of the field. Accept it from me, then I bury my dead here. Let me pay you for it, right? There'll be no arguments later. Let me pay for it." So Ephron says, "Okay, my lord, heed me. Land worth 400 silver shekels between me and you. What is it? No big deal. Bury your dead." So Abraham listened, and he did it. He pays it. Right? Now, he took advantage of him. Now, this is another test on Abraham, because God told Abraham, the entire land of Israel belongs to you. I'm God. I made the world. I'm giving it to you. So what is he buying a field for? It's his land. But Abraham understood this was part of his test. He had to realize that even though God promised him the land, that he still has to do this. And it still means that God promised him the land. It's still his land. But he has to deal with the reality of the situation. These people think it's their land. So he wants to buy it for him for a fair price. And they gouge him. Right? Now the topic changes. That ends that section. We go now on page 108 and 109 with chapter 24.
So when did the concept of sitting Shiva come into...
well, there's a mitzvah in the Torah of sitting Shiva. And we don't see it explicitly here that he did it, but he did it. That's what it means. He came to cry for her and to eulogize her, right?
So was it for
there's
actually
Medrash on
7 days? Or
yeah,
was it...
Shiva means 7.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So here it begins. Avram Zaken, Abraham was old. Baba Yamim, he came with his days. V'Hashem Baruch Avram B'Kol, and God blessed him with everything. V'Omer Avram, and God says, right, El Avdo Zaken Beso, Hamasho B'Chol Asher Lo, Simna Yadcha Takas Yerechi. So here he goes to his servant, who is the head servant of his household, and he says, I want you to take an oath. Taking an oath, then he says, how do you take an oath? He says, put your hand under my thigh. What he's really saying, because the Torah does not want to speak in vulgar terms, because it'll sound vulgar to us, is that he tells his servant, put your hand on the place where I'm circumcised, because that's the place on my body where God told me to do this. It's a covenant between me and God. It would be like today putting your hand on the Torah, right? In other words, that was considered, right? So you put your hand here, and I want you to take an oath. But before we get to that, there's a funny line here. It says, Abraham was old, he came with his days, and God blessed him with everything. Right? First, what does it mean he came with his days? Baba Yamim. Right? It doesn't say that about Sarah. So here the Rashi says, everybody explains that Baba Yamim means he came with his days. It was like this. We all have good days, we have bad days. We have all different types of days in our lives. We sometimes go on vacation and we maybe don't act the way that we should. Sometimes we get in a rut after working so many days in a row and so hard, we don't necessarily act like we should. So there are many things that happen to us in our lives that we have good days that we grow and we change and we work hard and we help people, and we have other days that we're grouchy and we're sad and we're bothered and we don't do anything. We have those two types of things. Right? So some days we are productive and some days are not productive. Right? Because even vacation is productive, right? It makes it so you can work. But sometimes you have days that are not productive. Here it says that Abraham came with his days, that for Abraham every day of his life was productive. Mm-hmm. Every day. Right? Now that's a nice thought. And certainly if I would tell you every day of his adult life was productive, that would make sense. But come on, when the guy was 3 months old, how productive could he have been? Like, what was a 3-month dude? All right, so say, okay, after the time he was old enough to walk, he was productive. But every day of his life, the Torah means every day of his life. So we learn an interesting point. When a person has an intent to do something, it says, if you have an intent to do something good, God, and then you can't. Let's say you have an intent to give tzedakah, and you go to the bank to get your money, and it's gone. Whatever reason, you spent it, someone else spent it, you don't remember, right? It's not available yet. You can't do it. You can't give anyone tzedakah. You don't have any money, right? So it says that if your intent really was to do it, God makes it, as far as the merit of doing it, he makes it as if you did it, even though you didn't do it. Why? Because your intent was to do it. You wanted to do it, and you didn't stop yourself. You got stopped, right? A man wants to put on tefillin, and God has it that he's in an accident, he loses his arm. Can't put on tefillin, but he wants to, right? So a person who wants to do a mitzvah, even if he can't do the mitzvah, is considered as if he does it. So Abraham, his entire life was for him to be able to do things to help people. Mm-hmm. Mitzvahs, to help people, make their life better, bring them to monotheism, raise their levels, cause them to be great people, help them out. Because he cared about them, because God told him to do it. It was a mitzvah to how he dealt with people, right? And therefore, when he was a baby, it wasn't that he chose not to do it. He couldn't do it. He's a baby. He can't talk. He can't walk. He can't do anything. So here we understand that since every day of his life was dedicated to helping people and serving God, then the days that he didn't do it, he wanted to do it. And therefore the Torah says it counts as if he did it. So therefore we say that every day of Abraham's life was productive, was positive. So when it says that when Abraham would die, he would go to heaven with all the days of his life. He'd say, okay, we're going to judge you now, Abraham. How'd you do? Well, 1967, it wasn't so great. I had a tough year. 73, my business failed. I really wasn't the person I should be. Right? No, Abraham would say, every day of my life was productive. Every day of my life I did something positive. Every day of my life I helped people. I became closer to you. That's all I did every day of my life. So it says Abraham came with his days. He was old and he came with his days. Mm-hmm. And what was the response? God blessed him with everything. What is everything? So we can understand this in many ways. The best way of understanding it is if a person loves money. Right? So King Solomon says, he who loves money is never satisfied with money. Right? If you say, if only I could make $250,000 a year, I would be happy. Right? I would. I'd be happy. I make $250,000, I'd be happy. You know what happens when you make $250,000? You say, if I made $500,000 a year, I'd be happy. But what happened to being happy at $250,000? Oh, no. I realize it's got to be $500,000, and it always happens. And it says in the Talmud, no person dies having acquired half of what they want. That's what people are. It says that that's why when you're a baby, you're born with your hands like fists, and when you die, your hands are open, because when you're a baby, you're starting to want to grab things, right? You want to start acquiring. At the end of your life, you realize you can't do it. You can't get everything, right? Abraham, it says, understood this, as Sarah did, that the purpose of life is not to acquire things. The purpose of life is to give things and to do things and to help. That's the purpose of life. So if Abraham came every day of his life, he was there to help people and to serve God. If every day of his life, then God's blessing to him is not everything. It was being satisfied. That Abraham was satisfied. Whatever he had, he was satisfied with it. If you gave Abraham $200,000 a year, he was satisfied. You gave him $1 million a year, he was satisfied. Right? That was important. And therefore, what did God give him? Everything. Everything he wanted. He's satisfied with it. He's got everything. You find this in Ethics of Our Fathers. It says, who's rich? A person who's happy with what he has. Well, what does that mean? If you're happy with what you have, that means that you're lazy. You don't care. Oh, really, I'm not going to go to work today. Whatever God gives me is fine. I don't need to work. Right? That's a dead person. Right? We have to have ambition. You have to have energy. But what it means is that whatever it is that you get, you're happy with it. Yes, you could want more. You could want to accomplish more and do more and have more. But you're happy with what you have. You're not feeling this is inadequate and I have to have more money because I love money. No. You say, I worked this year, I made $100,000 a year. I'm happy with that. I would like to work to get more. And I'm going to. And then next year you make $200,000. But you don't say, as soon as you make $100,000, it's not good. I need $200,000. You accept that you become satisfied. That's what God did here. God gave Abraham the blessing that you are going to be satisfied with whatever you have. Right? What's the definition of poor? I told you the definition of rich, right? Someone who's happy with what he has. Definition of poor is someone who's lacking something. Right? A person is poor who's lacking something. Right? So if you are satisfied, you're not lacking anything. Right? You're happy with what you have. You're not lacking. No matter what it is. If you make $20,000 a year, $100,000, $250,000, whatever it is, you're happy. So therefore, you're not poor. So that's why you have people who say, when I was a kid, I was raised in a poor family, but we didn't know it. You ever hear people say that? I didn't know it. How do you not know you're poor? You can't go to go to big shows. You can't do things. You can't take trips, right? You don't have a fancy house. Of course, you knew you were poor. No, you don't. People don't realize. Why? Because they're happy with what they have, even if they could use more. But there's a story one time that I heard from Rabbi Fran. He tells that this woman took her daughter because the woman wanted to buy a shaitel, right? So she went to the shaitel store, and the woman's showing her around, And she says, I like that sheitel over there. And she says, that's not for you. Take a look at this one, or this one, or this one. And she says, I don't like those. I like this one. And she said, no, take a look at these. And she says, finally, what's wrong with you? I want to see that one. You won't let me see the one I want? She says, look, I'll be honest with you. You know, I know you. You don't have much money. That sheitel you're pointing at is like $1,500. And these are $400. Let me direct you to one you can afford. She says, well, the truth is I can't afford any of them. At least let me buy the one I want. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's only part of the story, because she had her daughter with her. So her daughter comes out with her, and her daughter says, Mom, are we poor? And the mother says, no, we're not poor. So wouldn't the daughter know? I mean, if she doesn't have enough money to buy a sheitel for $400, right? So wouldn't the daughter know that they don't have money? She doesn't know, because they weren't unhappy. They were happy with what they had. That's it. Right? They wanted more, but they're happy with what they have. Right? That's what it says here with Avram. Okay, so now we're going to start another new section here, where Abraham, as I said, is speaking to his servant. His servant's name is Eliezer, and Eliezer is a Damascus, and he comes from Canaan, and he is a very trusted, honorable man that Abraham trusts, and he wants him to go and take an oath to go to find a wife for his son Isaac. It's time for him to get married. So first you have to wonder, why does he want him to take an oath? If he trusts him, it says that he is the head of his household. We know Abraham was rich. We know that from before. Then we say God blessed him with everything, so he certainly had a lot. Right? He had animals, livestock, he had belongings, he had real estate, he had cash, right? And he allows this Eliezer to be in charge of it all. So he finally says to Eliezer, I want you to go find a wife for my son, but you have to take an oath that you'll do what I tell you. Well, what do you mean? All of your money, like you gave him all of the passcodes for your ATM machine. You gave this guy all your passcodes. He does your banking for you. He has access to all your cash, right? That you trust him with. But when it comes to you, he's saying, I want you to go find a woman for my son, and I don't want you to take a Canaanite woman. I want you to take a different kind of woman, right? Then he has to take an oath. How can that be? You trust him with all his belongings, but he doesn't trust him to do this thing. And I'll illustrate the answer with a story. They say that at one time a guy was traveling in Europe years ago when all the Jews were living in Europe, and he went and he had a pack of money, and because he'd been working and he needed to find a place for Shabbos that he could stay and a place he could keep the money. So one of the guys in the city said, you can stay at my house and I'll feed you over Shabbos. And the guy took his money to the Chafetz Chaim's house, right, the big rabbi, and he knew he'll be honest. So he took his money, asked him, could you hold this for me over Shabbos in your house? Right? So clearly the guy stays at one person's house, he has the money at the other person's house. So why is it that he's so careful with his money, right, that he has to send it to the rabbi? He doesn't trust his host. But he'll stay in his host's house, and he'll keep Shabbos in his host's house, and he'll eat in his host's house. And maybe his host is a liar. Maybe he doesn't keep kosher. Maybe he's not so strict. Maybe he's going to do things that are not good. But he doesn't seem to care. He'll stay there, right? And what we'll find is that people will put their money on a much higher priority than everything else in their life, than their family, than their religious beliefs, everything. Money. So therefore, this guy did. Abraham here does the opposite, which is just the opposite. He says, I trust Eliezer with all of my belongings. He's an honest man. But we're talking about the spiritual future of the Jewish people. Who Isaac marries is going to, very shortly, be the father of the 12 tribes. And then the 12 tribes are going to become the Jewish nation. Right? Abraham understood this from prophecy. So therefore, I have to make sure that Isaac's wife is the right woman. And therefore, he tells him to take an oath. The same guy who's got hundreds of thousands of dollars of Abraham's money just sitting around, he has access to it, he has all the passcodes, he has everything, and yet Avram makes him take an oath. And that's the answer. He has to take an oath here because of the fact that he because he has to take an oath, because we're dealing with eternity, with spirituality, and that was something that was important to Avram. It's a message for us. right? So he tells them, and then he goes on, he starts to explain to him. He says, right, you should not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. Now, there were a couple of reasons for that. He says, you should go and take people from my family, my general family. Now, first thing is, Eliezer was a Canaanite. The servant was a Canaanite. And he tells him, don't take Canaanites. And one of the reasons is that Eliezer understood that he wasn't a Hebrew, he was a Canaanite, and that but he wanted his daughter, right, his only child, so to speak, to marry into the Hebrews, so that his descendants would be Hebrews, that they would be from the great people of the world. And Abraham says he can't, because Noah cursed the Canaan. He cursed him, and I've been blessed by God, and blessed and cursed can't be together. That's what he says, but which we have to understand. But there's another point that's important to know is that Abraham's family, we know, were idol worshippers. Right? They were pagans. They worshipped idols. His father had idols are us. He had a store that sold them. Right? That's who his father was, and the Canaanites are idol worshippers. So why does he want him to marry his family? The woman's not going to be any better than the Canaanites. The difference is that Avram understood that the people where he came from were good people, but they were pagans. In other words, they were caring people. They were not cruel. They were not disgusting. They were wrong. They believed in idols, but they had good character, while the Canaanites were known for having bad character. And the fact that both of them were idol worshippers, Avram says, when it comes to idols, I can deal with that. I can fix that. She comes from idol worshippers, it's easy. I can convince her there's only one God. But to change her personality, it's very difficult. She could do it with effort. I can't do it. So I don't want you to get a Canaanite. I want you to get from my family. That's what he's saying here. Yeah?
Rabbi, like you said, it was so important. So why wouldn't Avram choose the wife?
You mean that go himself?
Yeah.
Right? Because he was old. That's why he tells us before he was old. He wasn't able to travel like that to go and do it anymore. This is the end of his life now. This is where we are. So the servant, now it's interesting, I won't read this all, but this story is like 3 paragraphs. And then he goes out to find the woman. When he finds the woman, he tells the whole story to the woman, all 3 paragraphs, again. This is very weird for the Torah, because the Torah doesn't have an extra letter, let alone an extra word or an extra paragraph. And we already know the story about how Avram makes him swear to come out here and only to marry girls from this family, and he has to tell that to them also. The Torah doesn't have to tell us. He can just simply say, and Eliezer told them what happened with Abraham. That's it. Why do you have to tell them the whole story? So the commentaries tell us is because that even the words of the servants of our forefathers are holy. In other words, our forefathers were so holy and so special that even the people who served them became that way. And that's to teach us a lesson, that we can interact with Torah leaders, we can interact with rabbis, we can interact with people who are special people. The more we interact with them, and the more relationships we develop with them, the more friends we have with them, then the better we become. Right? If you associate with everybody who's humble, then you'll be embarrassed to not be humble. So you'll make yourself that way. If everyone you know gives charity, then you'll be embarrassed not to give charity. So you act in such a way. Right? That's the idea here of how this works. So it goes through the whole story, because even Eliezer, whose relationship to Abraham was a servant, but nevertheless learned a lot from Abraham, how to act, how to be, who he was. In fact, in the end, it says that he became blessed. Even though he came from a family that was cursed, he himself worked on himself that he became blessed. So he goes through this whole story, right? And so it says then, it says that he took 10 camels of his master's camels, and he set out right from on his way to Aram Naharaim. This is a place where he went, in the city of Nahor. He made the camels kneel down outside the city towards a well of water at evening time. The time came when the women who draw come out. So here he's sitting outside a well at this city, and and it's a desert. So as the sun is setting, it's getting cooler. The women come out with big jugs, and they go to the well and fill the jugs and bring it home for their families. So he says, Eliezer says, Hashem, God of my master Abraham, may you so arrange it for me this day that you do kindness with my master Abraham. So he prays to God that God should be kind to Abraham by letting me find the right woman. Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water. He's telling God, here I am by the spring of water. And the daughters of the townsmen come out. So all the young girls are coming. All the eligible bachelorettes are coming. Right? Let it be that the maiden to whom I shall say. Here he says now, I want a sign. If I say to a woman, please, tip over your jug so I may drink. Right? So imagine these young girls come out with jugs, empty jugs. They fill it up. It's not easy to fill a jug of water from a well. Right? They take it and they're carrying it back, and he stops them and says, please tip over your jug a bit so I can drink. Right? And she says, drink, and I'll even water your camels. I'll even feed your camels. Like, in other words, I don't mind. It's, you need help, I'm going to help you, and I'll go back and fill it up again. Right? So he says, right, you should also water your camels. Her will you have designated for your servant for Isaac. That should be the girl for Isaac. So basically, Eliezer is asking for a magic incantation. In other words, he's not just saying to God, you should make it. He said, God, I'm going to say to the girl, please give me some water. And she's going to say, yes, I'll give you water and for your camels. And that's God, you're making her say that. That's how I know she's the one. Right? It sounds like here's this pagan, right? And he's going to use magic to accomplish what Avram wants. Right? That's what it sounds like. He's treating God like an idol. God is all-powerful. Idols are not. You bribe idols, right? You give them sacrifices. You give them things in order to get what you want, even though it doesn't work, of course, but you believe it. So he's using the same method here. All right, God, I'm going to make a deal with you. I'm going to say this, you make her say that. That's how I know it's the right one, right? It's like weird. Like I remember one time going with my wife somewhere, and we're driving in a car, and we had Cracker Jacks. Remember Cracker Jacks? And they have a prize in them. So they have a prize and a fortune. So you have a little ring or something in there and a fortune. And it says, you will meet a dark man named John. All right, so we're driving, we stop, and we're going out to the airport, and we stop to get gas. The guy comes up, and his name is John. Oh my God, this is it. This must be the girl I'm going to marry. God's sending me a message, right? I was a ring in the Cracker Jacks, and there's a future is being told, and it happened. This has got to be the girl for me, right? Right? That's what he's saying, right? But you're laughing because it's silly, right? Of course it's romantic, but what if you're wrong? Right? You marry the wrong woman because you come up with silly stuff, right? So that's what he's doing. Right? So how is that? So really it's not what's happening here. Really what's happening is he's saying to God, I'm listening to what my master Abraham said. Abraham wants me to go to his family, right, to the tribe where he comes from, to find a wife for Isaac. Not because he loves that tribe, they're idol worshippers, but because they have good character. So I want to find the girl with the best character. What's a good character? That she cares about strangers. Here a strange man comes. He's sitting by the well. Clearly he's not dangerous. He's got all of these sheep with him and camels with him. And this little girl goes out there, fills up a jug, probably puts that on her head, is walking back. And he stops her and says, please, can I have some water for me? She says, not only I'll give you water, I'll even take care of your camels for you. Which means she's got to go back again, and how many times to fill up that jug? But she's prepared to do it to be kind to a stranger, right? That's the girl for Isaac. It's not a magic incantation. God, make these words come out of her mouth. If I find a girl who will respond that way, that's how I know. Because she cares, right? I'm not looking for a girl who'll give me water. I'm looking for a girl who gives strangers water, right? Who would care about people. So that's why he does it. And he picks her. And it says, and it was when he had not yet finished speaking. He wasn't even done saying it to God. Suddenly Rivka, was coming out. She who had been born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nachor, the brother of Avram. So she was like a niece, a grandniece of Avraham. So it was his family. And she had her jug on her shoulder. Now the maiden was very fair to look upon, a virgin whom no man had known. She descended to the spring, filled her jug, and ascended. So she went down to the spring, filled up her jug, went back up. The servant ran towards her and said, "Let me sip, if you please, a little water from your jug." She says, "Drink, my lord." And quickly she lowered her jug to her hand and gave him drink. When she finished giving him, she said, "I will draw water even for your camels until they've finished." You can imagine how much camels drink. And he had 10 of them, right? So she hurried and emptied her jug in the trough and kept running to the well to draw water for all the camels. The man was astonished at her, reflecting silently to know whether Hashem had made his journey successful or not. In other words, he had said it to God, and boom, immediately it happened. And it was, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a golden nose ring. Its weight was a beka, and 2 bracelets, 10 gold shekels. And he said, "Whose daughter are you, pray tell me? Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" Right? Notice he's got gifts now. He wants to give a dowry for the girl. She says to him, "I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nachor." And she said to him, even straw and feed is plentiful with us as a place to lodge. Right? We have a place for you, and you have straw. In other words, straw. That's not like today, if somebody comes to your house and you say, "Yeah, you can stay here, we got to stay in the basement on the floor." No, you're saying this is the master bed. Straw, right? It's not small things. So the man bows down, right? And he says, "Blessed is God of my master Abraham, who has not withheld his kindness and truth. As for me, Hashem has guided me to the house of my master's brothers." And then he goes, and here he meets her family. So we have this whole story. And then, if you'll see, at the bottom of this page, he tells the whole story again. It says here, the recapitulation. He repeats the entire story to the family, her family. Now, who's her family? So we now have a new figure entering our story. His name is Lavan. Lavan, we hear about quite a bit. It means white. Lavan, white. Why do we say, the commentaries say that his name was white, and was symbolic of who he was? Because he's the kind of guy who would smile at you with his white teeth and stab you in the back. Right? He was that kind of guy. He would trick you. He was a confidence man, a fraud. He did fraud. He wasn't a thief that would put a gun in your face and say, "Give me your money." He would make you think that you're doing something good. He'd say, "Come invest with me," and then steal your money. Right? That's the kind of guy he was. Right? And you'll see as we go through the weeks that he's in here, because he ends up having relationship with, we're here now, and he has a relationship later with Yaakov. And he's a tough character, and he does exactly what we said. All right, so he goes through this whole story with them. And then, so at the bottom of 117, it says, Lavan and Bethuel answers, "The matter stems from God. We can say to you neither bad or good." Oh, God sent you here? We can't argue with God. Right? "Rebecca is before you. Take her and go, and let her be a wife to your master's son, as Hashem has said." Right? Sounds wonderful, guys. Yeah, our daughter, clearly God told you to take our daughter. Go ahead, you can have her. And it was when Abraham's servant heard their words, he prostrated himself. The servant brought out silver and gold and clothing. He gave them to Rebecca, and delicious fruits he gave to her brothers and her mother. They ate and drank, and the men who were with him, and they spent the night. When they arose next morning, "Send me to my master." Her brother and mother said, "Let the maiden remain with us for a year. Then she'll go." Right? Now they're changing their mind. See what happens? He gives her all this stuff. Right? He gives Rivka all of this gold and silver. So she's living with her parents. So that means that as long as she stays with her parents, they own it. She has no ownership. She's a child. So her parents would own all this stuff. So they suddenly change their mind. Let's not be hasty. Let us prepare her for marriage for you, and then we'll send her down at the end of the year. So he says, "No, don't delay me now. Hashem has made my journey successful. Send me, and I'm going to go to my master." And they said, "Let us call the maiden and ask her." We'll ask Rivka, "Do you want to go now, or do you want us to get ready?" So they said, "Do you want to go with him?" She says, "Okay, I'll go." So they escorted Rebecca, their sister, and her nurse, as well as Abraham's servant and his men. They blessed Rebecca and said to her, "Our sister, may you come to the thousands of myriads, and may your offspring inherit the gates of your foes." Right? And then she left. Now she leaves with Eliezer, and she's now going back to Abraham's house, where Isaac lives. And we run into Isaac. Now Isaac came from having gone to Ber Laharoah. He was at this place called Ber Laharoah. What does he go there for? The commentaries say that's where he would pray. Isaac would go to pray in this one location. So he had gone to pray, and he's coming back. Right? So he's coming back now, and he went out he says he wanted to supplicate in the field. He went to pray in the field towards evening. It was now getting to be, it's mincha time, almost night. And he raises his eyes, and he saw, behold, the camels were coming. He looks out in the distance, sees camels. And Rebekah looks up, and she sees Isaac. So what does she do? She inclined while upon her camel. She leans over, and she says to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field?" And the servant said, "That's my master." She then took the veil and covered herself. Right? So she's going to meet her future husband. The servant told Isaac all the things he had done. The servant runs up ahead and tells him all the whole story, how he got her, how miraculous it was, how God had helped. And Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother. He married Rebekah. She became his wife, and he loved her. And this was Isaac's consoled after his mother. So what does he do? Sarah's dead. So he takes his wife and puts it in his mother's tent. This is not just literal, but it's also symbolic. It says that just like Sarah had certain blessings, it said that her dough always rose. It says she'd light Shabbos candles on Friday night. They would burn until the next Friday night. They never went out. So it says that when Rivka came into her tent, the same thing happened, that she had the same blessing. So they knew that she was the right one, right? And that's why it says that he was consoled after his mother. He mourned for his mother. He was still feeling her loss. But when his wife seemed to be just like his mother, it made him happy again. But it was interesting is that, listen closely to the order. It says, he takes her to the tent, he marries her, she becomes his wife, okay? And he loved her, right? And then he was consoled after his mother. So he doesn't say, as we would think, that he loves her and then he marries her. The love here doesn't mean he had relations. It means he loved her with love, the emotion of love. He married her and then he loved her. Not he loved her and then he married her, which we think in our society here, they go out for a while, they fall in love, they get married. Right? So what this is telling us is that in Judaism, we don't believe in that kind of love. That's called infatuation. Right? When a man sees a woman, he thinks that she's, the most beautiful thing he ever saw in his life. She thinks that he's extraordinary in his ways, and they become infatuated with each other, which means it's a fleeting feeling. It's a feeling because they're not together. They can't be together. But yet they're attracted to each other. Right? That's called infatuation. You can destroy infatuation very easily, or you can work on it. Right? But that's not love. That's why when people get married like that, where they just with this infatuation, they get married fast and they get married because they think they're in love. So many people get divorced because it's not real love. Real love comes from helping each other. When a man and woman get married and the man gets sick and the woman takes care of him, it causes the woman to love the man more. When the woman gets sick and the man takes care of her, it causes the man to love the woman more. When you give to someone, that causes love. The root word of love is hav. That means give. That's the root word of it. So love, it comes from giving. The more you give to someone, the more you'll like them. Now, you think it's the other way. The more someone gives you, the more you like them. It's not true. The more someone gives you, eventually you probably resent them. Because they're giving and giving and giving to you. And you're taking. You feel like a taker. Right? You feel like I'm poor. Like I should be taken from them. But when you give, you feel a part of that person. If I take let's say, I know somebody likes watches. So I have this watch that, I think is a really nice watch. I like to give it to them. I give it to them. Every time they wear that watch, I feel good, right? Because I gave them the watch. It makes me feel a little bit of ownership in their life. I know something about them. They like watches. I know that they like this one. They wear it all the time. It makes me happy, right? Because of that, my affection for them is more. I care for them more because I see that they took my gift, they appreciate it, and I understood them, so I care about them. I gave to them. The one who received it doesn't love me anymore because they received it. They might like me because I'm glad they're glad to get the watch, but it's not the same. The one who gives, the Gemara says the expression, the cow wants to give milk more than the calf wants to drink it. That the calf needs to drink it and wants to drink it, but the cow wants to give it more. A mother wants to help her children more than her children want to be helped. Right? A mother wants to feed her children more than they want to be fed. A person who loves someone else wants to give to that person even more than that person might want. Because that's love. That's what love is. That's what this is telling us. That at first he married her and she became his wife, then he loved her, not before. So that's why when people they're critical of the shidduch idea of the arranged dating, right, that we have as a way of getting married. and they shouldn't be critical because it's much more effective, even though we have crises and things don't work, but it is more effective because this is what happens. You have a young man and a young woman. They don't know each other. Right? Most of the time there's not a lot of commingling of the genders in our beliefs. So you find out what is her personality like? What is she interested in finding? What kind of a person is she? Now let's find a guy, similar goals in life, right? If you have similar goals in life, similar personalities that can get along with each other, now we say, let's get them to meet. Now they meet. They want to see, are they attracted to each other? Do they enjoy each other's personality? Is there sexual friction? Right? They can see that. If there is, everything will fall into place. When you're dating normally, what happens? You date someone who is attractive to you. That's all you know. That I meet a person in a bar. That person seems to be wealthy. They seem to be handsome. She seems to be pretty. Seems to be, can hold a conversation. That starts our relationship. How about similar goals? How about where you want to live? How about having children? How about religious beliefs? How about family ideas and traditions and things like that? Right? No. We still date, and then suddenly they want to get married. Now they start talking serious. At this point already, they're already emotionally attached. If they find out that they're not compatible, they might get married anyways, and it'll fail. The other way, they don't meet. There's no emotional attachment until you already know they're compatible. The question now is, do they like each other? That they can figure out themselves. Right? And if then they have affection for each other, then it works. So that's why the Torah tells us here that first he married her, and then it says she became his wife. That means that they were together, and then he loves her. And it's a very, very specific that it speaks in such a way. So now they're married, and we're now going to start talking about Yitzchak. Yitzchak is the least spoken about in the Torah of all of our forefathers. I'll give you a bit of a talk about him next week. This is a very interesting Talmud about Yitzchak arguing with God and how it fits him. But the parsha concludes here with the offspring. What happens to who comes from Isaac, who comes from Yishmael, Abraham's other son, right? And then it concludes with the death of Yishmael. Yishmael being Abraham dies, and then Yishmael and Isaac are living on. Yishmael dies. Yishmael is the father of the Arab people. Right? They say it, we say it. Right? That's not an argument. Yishmael is a son of Abraham. The difference is they say that he was the chosen son. We say it was Isaac. Our Torah says it was Isaac. Their book, right, that they used, the Quran, which was written 1,000 years later by a man, acknowledged by a man, not by like ours. We believe is from God. We understand it's from God. And their book says that it was Yishmael who was the chosen one. But other than that, they do acknowledge who he was. That's why we could have, although it's not common today, there are Jews who have had the name Yishmael, and there are certainly Arabs who have the name Yishmael. There are many Arabs named Ibrahim, which is Abraham, right? Just like we have lots of Jews who are named Abraham. So it's a similar idea. So we'll conclude with that for today.